Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. I am your host Keith Crockford and today I am chatting with Pip Stewart. Hello Pip.
Hello Keith, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. Now Pip is a journalist, an adventurer, an author and an all-round advocate for purposeful adventure. And that's what I kind of want to be focusing today's podcast episode on, and that is purposeful adventure. Now, Pip, for those who are going to be new to your story, how did your journey into the world of adventure begin?
Oh, well, I'm very much an accidental adventurer, really. I've always loved travel. I grew up, my dad was in the forces, so moved around quite a bit. And I think that peripatetic upbringing kind of inspired me in my adult life. And I guess I lived in Hong Kong, I lived in Malaysia, but my first really big adventure was probably cycling from Malaysia to London, halfway around the world, 10,000 miles. And that was the first time that I was like, wow, there is this amazing way to travel, human powered travel on a bicycle. And it just completely unlocked a different way of traveling, of telling stories and kind of getting off the beaten track in a way that I hadn't done before. I then arrived back in London and the realities of life hit, Keith. Mortgages, jobs, rent, that kind of thing. And I had to move back in with my parents for a bit, look for a job. And I found a job as Red Bull's adventure editor, which I did for a couple of years. But I was reading about other people's adventures and other people's stories. And it kind of got me itchy feet again. And I suppose when the opportunity to do a documentary on the Amazon region with a guy called Reza Pakravan came up, I sort of leapt at the chance. And so we went to Brazil and Peru, again on a bicycle for a large part of it. And then ultimately, my biggest expedition sort of came off the back of that, really, because I suppose expeditions, you meet people, you gain in confidence. And I was at a festival called Campfire Festival, which is sort of an adventure travel festival. And I met a woman called Laura Bingham, and she and I got on quite well. And then she sort of rang me up a couple of months later while I was sitting at my desk at Red Bull. And I think it was a post-lunch slump, Keith, when your brain's slightly addled after lunch. And she said, how do you feel about doing a world first trip through the Amazon rainforest down a river that has never been kayaked before, called the Essequibo? And I think in my post-lunch haze, I heard, floating down a river with a pina colada in hand. But essentially, I signed up for a 3-month expedition with a community called the YY community in Guyana. They're the indigenous people who are closest to the source of the Essequibo River. And together, this multinational team, we completed a world first source to sea descent of the Amazon River, or not the Amazon, the Essequibo River through the Amazon, having been a beginner kayaker when I started. So yeah, that's sort of a potted history of how I fell into adventure. And it's probably worth noting for your audience that I'm 5'3" and I like eating cake. So I'm not necessarily your stereotypical explorer type.
So you've gone from travel editor and cautious cyclist to someone who's paddled 1,000 kilometers through the jungle. Did you ever imagine this would be your path?
No, absolutely not. And I think that's the joy of travel, isn't it? And how it can expand your mind. Because I remember that feeling when you leave school and everyone says, oh, the world is your oyster now. You can do whatever you want. And it's bloody terrifying, to be honest, because the truth is most of us have no idea what we want to do. I think if you do know what you want to do, you're so lucky. And I'm often asked, how did I get the career that I've got? And I'm always a bit confused about how to answer that, because it's all been very accidental and it's always been, I've just done something that I've been interested in. And one thing has led to another. So yeah, there was no rhyme or reason to it. And absolutely not. There's no way. If you'd have told me 10 years ago that I'd have done the things that I've done, I'm not sure I'd have believed you.
I think that comes down to a lot of these things, doesn't it? Where, the first thing you need to do is just say yes.
Absolutely. And it's scary. That's the thing. And it's, for me, it's often like the power of teamwork because, well, the outdoors community is incredible. Like I said, when we started the Guyana trip, I'd kayaked once in New Zealand, and it was with an ex-boyfriend. And I remember thinking, this is the world's most rubbish sport. My shoulders ached. It was just hell, to be honest, Keith. And I thought, I'm not here for this. But then we kind of threw open our hearts and our kind of cries for help to the outdoors community and said, look, can anyone help train essentially newbies in kayaking and get us up to a level? And we had so many offers of help, so much training. And it really it's that kind of team effort and also just being on location with the YY community and learning about sort of jungle survival as we go, because you often these things you can't do on your own. You kind of have to have a team around you. And I think that's really powerful. And actually, when you do achieve something together as a team, that kind of, it tastes better, doesn't it, than when you're on your own, really.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, people listening to this can relate to that. People have similar fears. Are they fit enough? What's the altitude? How's my body going to cope with altitude? The social anxiety of being with other people. And, we certainly see it on, a lot of our customers come onto our trips as solo people that have never met anyone before because they don't know anyone else that wants to do these crazy things that they want to do. But adventure just brings people together, and people are friends from the moment that they meet at the airport. Like it just disappears, that social anxiety straight from the start.
It really does. And I think there's something so incredibly bonding about adventure. So I was in a really unique position in that there were two women from the UK going out, as well as myself, a woman called, as I said, Laura Bingham and Ness Knight, and they were best friends. So I was very much the third wheel on this expedition. I didn't know Laura that well. I'd met her at a couple of events, and none of us had met our YY teammates. But I think when you go through something like travel together, when you kind of have those raw and rough moments, it bonds you in a way like it doesn't in any other way, I don't think. And funnily enough, I was invited onto an expedition once with the Royal Marines. And we were it was a journalistic piece all about mental health. And a lot of the Marines were saying that actually some of the things that they've seen at war, they couldn't talk about in like a therapy session. But when you're around a campfire or when you're paddling next to someone in a kayak or hiking, it's almost that not looking someone directly in the eye enables you to kind of talk more freely than perhaps you have like in a more formal setting. And I think that's true of trips, of expedition, of travel. It allows you to connect more deeply to yourself, to people around you, and to the natural world. And that for me is part of the magic of it.
Yeah, I love group travel. Obviously running a group travel company, you've got to kind of like it. But
shocker, shocker.
But the thing I like about it is that everybody's got an interesting story. And when you're trekking to Everest Base Camp, you've got a group of 10, 12, 14 of you. And, you spend that few hours with each person just learning about them and having conversations and seeing what they've done in their life. And that's the one thing that I really enjoy. Because like you say, what do you do when you're trekking for 10 hours? You talk to people.
That's it. And you get to the kind of the nitty gritty of life, don't you? There's none of this, what do you do for work? Bullshit chat that like we seem to, are you busy? It's like, tell me your soul. And that is the joy of it.
What do you think these experiences have taught you about your own resilience? Because you've been to some crazy places. You've even had a flesh-eating parasite go through you. Like, what's that taught you about you?
Yeah, the flesh-eating parasite, which I picked up from Guyana off the bite of a sandfly, that wasn't ideal. Not least because I had to have 3 weeks of chemotherapy to try and nuke it, and you still don't know whether it's gone or not. But I think, and maybe your listeners will relate to this, I think when you do tough things, it's that type 2 fun, isn't it? It's always better in hindsight. And, I make light of the leishmaniasis, but it was genuinely one of the worst experiences I've ever been through. But I think it's trite to say that you can always find a positive spin on things, because there's just some things in life that you just can't spin in a positive way. But I think what it is fair to say is that there is a choice about how we respond to things. And I think that's what travel has taught me. And that's what some of these difficult situations, whether it's, I nearly sat on a deadly snake when we were on the trip. I came back with a flesh-eating parasite. But it's like, how do you take something from this? How do you respond to it? And for me, off the back of getting leash, I do a lot of campaigning work around leishmaniasis now. It's the second biggest parasitic killer after malaria. It's highly under-researched and underfunded, primarily because most people who get it are in the global south. So there's just no sort of capital incentive for drugs companies to do much about it. But ironically, because of climate change, sandflies are moving more into Southern Europe. So I'm actually working with the EU on trying to create an early warning system for sandflies. If you'd have told me when I started this trip that I would be involved in something like this and giving my feedback, again, I wouldn't have believed you. And I think it's trying to realize that we're all capable of more than we think, even if we don't realize it until many, many years later. Getting through the tough times, you just grin and bear it almost. And hopefully that post-traumatic growth will occur somewhere along the line. And just realize that you are capable of more than you think.
And your adventures often have a strong sense of purpose. So learning from the local communities, like you just said about raising awareness then. But what does purposeful adventure mean to you?
That's a really interesting question. I think it's about knowing why you're doing something. My friend Ash Bardwaj has written an amazing book called Why We Travel. And in it, he kind of lists out different chapters. And some of it can just be pure hedonism. It is okay to go on an adventure because it's fun, but knowing that that's why you're doing it. Not everything has to be worthy. But I think for me, purposeful travel is about connection at its core. It's about connecting with yourself, with other people in the natural world around you. And I think there's great joy in that. And
you're really passionate about slow travel. You were saying about cycling from Malaysia to London, and obviously there's a whole thing about sustainable travel at the minute, and we've done podcasts on this as well, where unfortunately the aviation industry contributes so much to environmental factors, but you can still travel on a plane and be sustainable. And actually part of that sustainability comes from supporting those local communities that maybe wouldn't have people visiting them unless they flew there. Now, obviously, it would be great if we could completely cut it all out. I mean, what's your view on that? Because, a lot of people don't have 6 months to take off to cycle where they want to get to. So what is your view on that kind of sustainable environmental issues?
Yeah, it's a really problematic one, isn't it? Because I completely am aware of the irony of saying we need to protect the rainforest having flown there, for example. And I think a lot of it is down to questioning, who's the right person to tell the story in that particular instance. If it's traveling for yourself, it's like, is there a better way that I could get there? Could you go on the train? How, as you say, like, where is the money going? Because there's great power with your wallet, right? What we're choosing to spend our money on, which operators we're choosing to use, how much of it gets into the hands of local people on the ground. So I think there's a lot of questioning that needs to be done. I think it's a conversation that is still evolving and still happening. It's such a minefield, really, because in an ideal world we wouldn't fly, but there's so much positive stuff that comes from travel, like the connection piece, and all the benefits of that as well. But yes, I went to a brilliant talk one time, and a guy was like, well, his retort to that was, go to London. If you want to eat Nepalese food, there's so much amazing stuff in London. Like, what is it about going to the place that you really want to to do. And I think it's just about questioning our own motivations and asking ourselves, what is it that we're trying to get out of this? What can we add to this more broadly than ourselves, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that. And, and my view on it, obviously we look at who our providers are when we go into country. We make sure that all of our providers are local. So therefore money that we are paying is not going to an American bank account because the business is based in America, operating in Nepal. So those are the things that, we're making sure of. But I also think as well, there's a really strong thing of, if we take Kilimanjaro, for example, or Everest Base Camp, for example, like the money that is generated from people going and doing those climbs, doing those walks, those people, that employment wouldn't be there. So if we were to suddenly to say we are going to stop flying and we're not going to go to Nepal, or we're going to go by land, the amount of people that would go in trek to Everest Base Camp, how many people would be unemployed? How many businesses would close down? And I think that's super important for sustainability as well. It's not just about the environmental factors. If we're talking about sustainable travel, then to stop that would be going against sustainable travel.
Yeah, there's so much nuance to it, isn't there? And trying to unpick it all is difficult.
Yeah, and I think people just have to make their own decision on what they think is kind of acceptable on that, really. I mean, I would love to spend 6 months cycling down to Nepal and then, but people just don't have the time for it. Like you say, you came back from one of your trips and a mortgage got in the way and a job and, all these things,
Yeah, 13 months later and you think, oh gosh, I need to get a job.
Yeah, how much can you really realistically do with your 28, 30 days annual leave a year? It's kind of, you've really got to think about that.
Definitely.
You spoke right at the start about this, saying, you're not your stereotypical outdoorsy person. You like eating cake. Why do you think so many people feel like adventure isn't for them? And what would you say to them?
What would I say to people? Well, basically, I think adventure is for everybody. And I think it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the more it gets developed. And I think to start out, just ask someone who knows what they're doing to take you for a hike or go for a kayak or whatever it is. And don't be afraid to laugh at yourself. And this is the thing, when we watch our children learn, they're unafraid to make mistakes. Yet as we age, we become, I feel, more and more timid and more afraid of looking silly, if you know what I mean. So we just don't do things. And actually, I think we need to bring a bit more comedy into daily life, a bit more kind of curiosity, and just give things a go. The great thing about modern technology and the ability to connect is, I guarantee, if you've got an interest in something, or if you want to go somewhere and do something else, there'll be other people who want to join you. And that is absolutely wonderful.
And I think as well, like, there is different types of adventure, isn't it? And I always use the terminology of soft adventure and hard adventure. Like, it doesn't have to be extreme. And people think the word adventure and adventure travel is all about being extreme. But actually, that's not the case. There are many trips that we would class as adventure travel. But, I think anybody could go and do them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just about sort of finding what works for you and developing that muscle. Because, like I said, I started out, my first big trip was that cycle from Malaysia to London. And I remember on day one, I'd not ridden a bike with panniers before, which was probably an error, as I'm going down sort of a Malaysian motorway thinking this is not ideal. I should have planned this a bit better. I should have got a bit fitter. And I'll never forget, about 3 weeks in, we came to our first sort of hill. Well, it was barely a hill. It was sort of more of a little mogul, like a bump. And I said to Charlie, my now husband, I was like, I can't do this. You picked the wrong woman. I tried to break up with him, Keith. I was so embarrassed. I was like, right, that's it. I'm going home. And he said, he was very kind. He said, look, I will drive you we will cycle to the nearest airport. You can go home, but you just need to get on your bike. And he said to me, these are not physical adventures, Pip, they're mental ones. And like, once I got that in my head, and once I got back on the bike, I was like, you know what? I can sit and write at my desk for 8 hours a day. I can get on a bike and cycle for 8 hours a day. It's that sort of slow and steady kind of way of being. And actually, by the time I'd got back on my bike, I was like, right, I'm going to do the whole goddamn thing, because, I made a decision now. And I think it's just practice, isn't it? It's practice and belief.
Yeah, and I think it's confidence as well, isn't it? I think so many people lack that confidence to make that decision to go and say yes. So many people. I mean, we're trying to get people make their bucket list, come alive, because so many people have a bucket list, but how many people actually do anything that's on their bucket list? I hear it from people all the time. Oh, you do the most amazing things. Like, I can't believe you get to do all those things. Like, I'd love to go and climb Kilimanjaro. I'd love to go gorilla trekking. I'd love to learn to scuba dive. Well, why don't you do it then? Like, why don't you just say yes and go and do it? Like, you're going on holiday this year. Why don't you just change your holiday and go and do what it is you want to do? But I think people just don't have that confidence to be like, yeah, I'm going to go and do it.
Absolutely. And I think that's where things like group trips. I remember my first, I really wanted to learn to dive, and I was nervous to go on my own. So I went on a group trip, and actually, as we were talking about earlier, you kind of meet people, and that really sparked it for me, because I was like, you know what, I can go and do these things on my own, and that's totally okay. Keith, I'm gonna throw this around to you now. Sorry, the journalist in me is so curious.
Okay.
But like, you said so many people don't say yes. Like, what made you sort of set up a company all around, living your bucket list, really?
Well, I mean, as I've said before, like, I started in the school overseas market. So I was doing overseas expeditions for schools. And, obviously with school trips, it's not the children that decide where they want to go. It's that teacher who's like, I'm going to organize this trip because I want to go and learn to scuba dive, and I'll just take 12 children with me, and, I'll get it paid for. Like, that is the purpose of being a school teacher that organizes a school trip. Like, they've got to want to go and do it. So, and obviously because, friends and family were seeing what we were doing with these school children, they were like, oh, I'd like to learn to scuba dive. Oh, I'd like to. So in the end, I was like, well, I'll just put a trip together then. Well, I'll take you to Gozo and we'll learn to scuba dive, or I'll take you to Kilimanjaro. And that's kind of where it all really started, was just people coming to me going, wow, look at these opportunities these young people have got. I wish I could do that. But again, it was that teacher who was saying, I want to do this, and going out and arranging it for the children to then for them to succeed. I mean, I always remember there was the first time I went to Easter Island, which had always been on my bucket list. But I just got a random phone call from a teacher one day who went, can you organise a school trip to Easter Island? I've always wanted to go. And if I can get 30 children to come along with me, then I get a free trip to Easter Island. And I was like, yeah, I can do that. And that's kind of where it started from, really. So for me, it was about, and school trips are hard. Like, running an adult trip, the majority of the time is much easier than running a school trip. So yeah, to do it with adults who can kind of look after themselves, and it is much easier. So that was kind of the way forward, really.
Oh, I love that. I mean, what could go wrong with however many school children? Oh,
yes. No, there's plenty of things gone wrong, and one day I will write a book about that, because I could tell a few stories. I'll tell you. But I think going back to what we were saying about group travel, I think it's people who've got a fear of what happens if I can't do it, what happens if I slow the group down, what happens if and that's what they don't have the confidence to go and say yes to. What happens if I'm the slowest? What happens if I'm the oldest? What happens if I'm the youngest and don't get on with anyone? I just think. But I always say, like, you see people arrive at the airport and people are always a little bit quiet, or you arrive in country and, people are always a bit quiet to get. But, within 15 minutes of chatting, everyone's in full flow. Like, I don't think it matters about age. It doesn't. You're just there to do the same trip. You're there to share an adventure together, and those things in the end don't matter. And instantly people are like, "Oh, I don't know what I was worried about. This is fine." But you've got to make that step to do it.
I think you touched on something really interesting there, Keith, which is I think we all have these insecurities, don't we? Whether it's like, whether we're the slowest or whether we're this or whether we're that, whatever it is. And I've definitely had that on most of my journeys. Charlie, we did our trip in 13 months. My husband, Charlie, probably could have cycled back from Malaysia to London in 9. When I was with the Royal Marines, I was literally being pushed up the mountain on my bicycle. The Marines would take it one by one to give me a shunt from behind. And then the next Marine would come and push me up the mountain because they were desperate to try and get back to watch the World Cup football final. And I was slowing down the progress and we needed to make a ferry by a certain point. In the Guyana trip, I mentioned I'm 5'3". I don't move particularly quickly. I was definitely the slowest. And, you have to, I don't know, reconcile those inner demons, that inner critic that we all have. It's all in there in all of us, and actually start to try and focus on what we do add. And for me, it was kind of going, okay, well, I'm not the fastest kayaker, but I've got stamina when it comes to hiking. I will continue to walk until I literally drop. I like to think I brought an element of comedy and positivity to the group. My writing skills resulted in a book off the back of the group, of the trip. So, I think even when we feel like we aren't contributing, we are. And it's the same in life, isn't it? If you ask your friends, if you're having a really bad day and you just think everything's rubbish, and then you go and ask your friends, what is it about me that, you like? You'll probably get hundreds and hundreds of different responses. And I think it's just remembering that we are our own worst critic. Get outside of yourself and just give it a go, because you will feel so proud of yourself for doing it. And other people are too wrapped up in their own thoughts to even care about what's going on with you, I think, quite often.
Yeah, and I think everybody else has those thoughts as well. No one's worrying about that, are they? As well, no one thinks about that, because they're all, they're worried about what people think about them at the same time. And I just think, some people out there going, "Oh, I couldn't think anything worse of doing group travel," and there's other people there that love group travel and couldn't think about anything worse about having that time on their own. And I just think, whichever camp you're in, just embrace it.
Yeah, find out what works for you, because it's not one size fits all, is it?
No, exactly that. I mean, you've written a lot about how nature has supported your own mental well-being. How important has that connection become to you?
Oh, it's mad. It's honestly, I'm not religious, but it's my church. I've got an allotment recently. I love being in the garden. I love being outside. I love being in wild environments. It's just, I think there's something about it that is so humbling, that just makes us, it renders us so insignificant. And I love that, because whilst that could look quite bleak, I find great meaning in that, because actually, when you're worrying about the day to day, or the he said, she said, this is happening, that's happening, none of it matters. And I think when you realize that we're just a part of this amazing system, this amazing world, and we're such a tiny part of it. And I definitely felt that in the Amazon rainforest in Guyana. One of our guides was a guy called Jackson, and he just turned to us and said, I think more people have been on the moon than they have in this particular part. He's like, I don't even know if humans have ever walked here. And that is just mad, to think that there was so much life happening that most of us don't even give a second thought to. And it's happening all over the world. And for me, that's just magical. And it really gives me a sense of perspective. It gives me a sense of, life continues, life is good. And I always feel better if I'm having a bad day for going for a walk or going for a swim. It's just, it's my happy place.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, because recently I came back from a whitewater rafting trip in Morocco. And, so many people don't even realize you can go whitewater rafting in Morocco. People think of Morocco, they think of the Sahara Desert, they think of it being hot. And, there are only 2 companies that offer this rafting in Morocco. There is a very small weather window when there is enough water in the river to be able to raft it. And we had that exact same thing the other day about how many people do you actually think have rafted down this river? Like, when from the moment you set off to the moment you finish, you might see 2 or 3 people like on the whole journey on your way down that are walking next to the river. And that's kind of it. And it's just that when you put that question to people and they suddenly actually start thinking about it, you just realize actually how lucky you are to have experienced that. And
yes.
I always go back to the, one of my favorite trips is Easter Island. And people always say to me, like, why do you love Easter Island so much? And, my response always is, for 2 reasons. One, it's one of the most amazing places I've ever visited, and just the story behind it and the unknown of it still. But the other reason is if you go into a pub and speak to someone and say, I've done Everest Base Camp, like they've got 3 mates that have done Everest Base Camp. But if you say I've been to Easter Island, very few people know anyone that's ever actually been to Easter Island. Apart from, like I say, when I was in Uganda the other day, we had I had several clients that were on my Easter Island trip, and actually there were 7 people sat around the table who had all been to Easter Island. So that was a little bit kind of, but that's unheard of, to bring 7 people together that have all been to Easter Island. And that's what I love about travel is going and finding those places that, obviously it's very difficult now. I mean, you've been lucky enough to go and find somewhere that was unexplored, but the world has been pretty much explored now. There's still some things out there still to be done, but for the majority of people, it's as it is. We've got what we've got.
Yeah, and do you know what? I'm going to have to get Easter Island on my bucket list now, but I think there's something. I've often heard that people say there's not much left to explore, and I think there is still. And I think as well, maybe it's a change of mindset around what we mean by exploring, because one of the realizations I had on this journey is that a lot of it is about ego, isn't it? Let's be honest. It's about like the chest beating. I've done this, I've done that. And actually, the joy of it was not so much about going somewhere that had never been explored. It was more about just the vast beauty of nature. And ironically, you don't need to travel halfway around the world or wherever it is to get that. It is purely a mindset thing. And I think so many of us need that now. We crave it. If you consider, we are constantly bombarded by technology, aren't we? And I had this incident when we had like a satellite system called a BGAN on the river, so that we could communicate and send messages and talk to loved ones and reach medical people if we had an emergency. But I had this really bizarre experience where we were literally in the most beautiful place. It was almost like something out of the Garden of Eden, if that was a real, if it had come to life, and it was just magic. And then I signed on to Instagram, and I'm looking at my friends doing stuff in London, and I'm feeling jealous. And I'm like, there is something really messed up about this. It's trying to change our mindsets. And something that I took from that trip was limiting my use of technology, because that is not a healthy place to be when you are in an amazing location, checking Instagram and feeling like you're missing out on something. It's not being present in the truest sense of the word. And more than that, I realized every time I turned my phone on and I would get like that WhatsApp notification or that little beep or that buzz, the sensation that was going through me was not dissimilar to when we had a real life jaguar come through our camp in the middle of the night. It brushed under our hammocks. We had to chase it out. And that fear sensation of like, oh, panic, we might get eaten. I noticed I was having on a very small scale, but with technology, that constant beep, beep, buzz, buzz that we all have in our pockets. And I'm like, we've taken the jaguar in the modern world and placed it in our pockets. And that is terrifying. And I think that is why trips, like kind of time away, time to connect, time to talk, just without any sort of technological interruption is so powerful.
Yeah, no, completely. I completely get that at all. I think, the other thing as well from, how do you cope with post-expedition blues?
Yes, well, in my case, when I got back from Guyana, I was, hooked up to chemo, so that was not great either. But so I think it's about acknowledging the feeling. There's no getting away from it. It is, you're suddenly back into reality of the day to day. And I think something about travel is it makes life slow down, I think, in a really beautiful way. I think when we're in our routine and our rhythm, however amazing daily life might be for all of us, there's that kind of familiarity. And I think it's when you take yourself away and you're seeing new things, even going to a supermarket in a different country is so fascinating, because you're like, oh, this cereal's like this here. And I just think it sparks a curiosity in the human mind. And then when we go back to the familiar, it's familiar and we know what we're expecting, and there's not quite as much excitement. So for me, it's about trying to introduce a little bit more excitement. It's about those lighthouses in the future to look forward to. Set a goal, meet up with a friend, like have the things that you'll look forward to. And then kind of relive your old trips, look back at photos and go, God, like how lucky am I that I've had this experience, and just accept that you're going to feel a bit rubbish for a while because you felt so good. And it's another thing in our society where I feel like we're constantly trying to feel happy. And actually it is the human condition to feel up and down and all the emotions in between. And I think we need to just learn how to sit in those a bit better.
Yeah, I think my advice to people is always plan your next one and have something to look forward to. Right, obviously from a business perspective, it's great, but also from their perspective, it's also good as well.
Yeah, exactly. Sign here immediately.
Obviously, you've got a family now. How has that changed your traveling now you've got a family?
Oh, it's amazing. I think when I got pregnant with my first, I remember someone saying to me, well, that's the end of your adventuring now. And I was like, oh, no. I think it is fair to say that becoming a mum has changed my tolerance for risk. I'm not sure I would be putting myself in such dangerous situations as I did in our Guyana trip. It's no exaggeration to say, but I think on a daily basis, there were moments where I was like, this could be a life-ending day, whether it was going backwards down a rapid or slipping or, caiman, scorpions, spiders, snakes. There was real, genuine danger on a day-to-day basis. So I think I realized the limits of my comfort zone on that journey. But having children, it's just given me a whole new appreciation of introducing the next generation just to how amazing the world is. And seeing my son pick up pebbles on the beach and look at the colors, and they point stuff out to me that I'm like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought or noticed that for a very long time. And there's a lot of joy in that. So I think, we've done sort of camper wagon trips to Norway, and we've done sort of smaller scale stuff. We went to Morocco and Mexico at the beginning of the year. And it's kind of showing them the world and introducing to them in a whole different way. And having children and traveling with children really opens people up. It's amazing, actually.
And what are your plans with your children traveling in the future?
I'm really keen to kind of see travel as how do we foster that education and that love and lust for learning in them. So I'm kind of keen to see what my kids say they're interested in and see how we can enable it in some way. I think there was an amazing book. I've totally blanked on the woman's name, which is not ideal, but she was saying that her kids were really interested in rainbows, and she was traveling around the world trying to find the colors of the rainbows in various like geological sites and things like that. And I was like, what a wonderful idea, just kind of taking your child's curiosity and then fostering that through travel in a really fun way. And to your point about, working in education, it's where do you want to go? But I bet your students, it was life-changing for them as well. So it's that balance, isn't it, between kind of what you want to do as an adult versus how do we get the kids engaged and enthused and want to continue this when they're an adult?
Yeah, and I don't think it changes from, obviously I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of, youths on youth expeditions, and I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of adults on adult expeditions. And I think, travel is one of the things that just changes people no matter who you are.
Absolutely.
And, I think an adult can come away from a trip and be, as changed as much as a child can when they experience something for the first time. Like, I've taken so many, I've given so many, taken so many adults away, and, they've never, their holidays beforehand have been, European travel packages to Benidorm, and then suddenly you're taking them to Africa or you're taking them to Nepal, and they've never really experienced culture before because it's new to them. If you go to Benidorm, there's no cultural change there to there is in England. But you even, and I always say to people, like, if you want to go and experience a massive culture shock, go to Morocco, like a 3-hour flight, and you'll have such a big culture difference compared to what you're used to. And I think it just, changes people. And, one of our trips that does that is, trekking across the Sahara Desert for 5 days. Like, people come back from that trip, just sat on the highest sand dune watching the sunset or the sunrise. And people they tell you that they've changed. And it's just amazing to be part of that journey with people.
Oh, it's so magic, because I think there is that obstacle of like, and it's an interesting question, I suppose, Keith. It's like, we can write these bucket lists, but what makes people actually take that next step? And I suppose if you're not the most organized, having someone organizing it is probably quite a handy thing.
Yeah, and that's why, there are various ways of traveling, aren't there? You can, I would say, our kind of clientele are very time poor in terms of, they only get their, holiday allowance a year, and they want to try and get as much out of that holiday allowance a year as they can. And for someone to go and organize that for them, it just means that they can get more done in that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Focus on your strengths.
Exactly that. We always love to finish our podcast off by asking our guests, what is currently on your bucket list?
Oh, well, I'm just chatting to the voices in my head at the moment, Keith. I'm writing my first fiction book. And I know it's not travel related, but on my bucket list, it would be to have, I'm just going to say out here, a best-selling fiction book out in the world. So that's my next big project. But beyond that, it's do more travel with the family for sure.
Brilliant. Pip, where can people find out more about you and more about your travels? Can they follow you anywhere?
Yeah, so mainly I'm on social media at Pip Stewart. That's Stewart. So yeah, Pip Stewart on Instagram, X, whatever it is.
Whatever they changed it to this week.
I know, it's mad, isn't it? Can't keep up.
Well, Pip, thanks ever so much for coming on and sharing your story with us today. It's been inspirational for me, and hopefully the listeners listening have found that really inspirational as well. And hopefully it's kind of given you that, if you are on the fence about stepping into adventure travel, hopefully it's made you want to say yes and go and get some done. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. I love recording these. It's great to be back with the podcast after the little break that we've had. And I will be back next week with another episode. So thanks very much. And thanks again, Pip. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.